Florida is famous for sunshine and terrible decisions, but when human ego challenges the immutable laws of physics, the environment always wins. Today we examine 6 fatal cases where lethal shortcuts and ignored warnings ended in absolute tragedy. This is a cold documentary analysis, not an instruction manual. Never attempt to replicate these mechanical errors. Watch and learn. May 2007. The hot, sticky air of a Florida night hung heavy over the manicured grass of a private golf club. Sirens wailed in the distance. The sharp sound of police radios cut through the quiet neighborhood. A 22-year-old man was sprinting across the green. His chest heaved with every breath. He was the prime suspect in a recent, messy burglary. The police were closing the net around him. He heard the distant bark of a K-9 unit. Dogs meant his scent was compromised. He needed to break the trail immediately. He looked frantically for a solution. Ahead of him sat a large artificial water hazard. It was a dark, glassy pond surrounded by thick reeds and limestone rocks. To a desperate mind, it looked like the ultimate hiding spot. Water hides scent from tracking dogs. Water provides deep cover from flashlights. The logic seemed flawless in the heat of the moment. He ran straight toward the edge of the pond. He completely ignored a small reflective metal sign planted in the grass. The sign clearly warned all trespassers to beware of local wildlife. He did not have time to read warnings. He stepped off the dry bank and slid into the murky depths. The water was surprisingly warm. It smelled strongly of decaying algae and wet dirt. His heavy sneakers sank deeply into the soft, treacherous mud at the bottom. He waded out until the dark, stagnant water reached his chest. He crouched low behind a thick patch of cattails. Just then, 2 police officers walked onto the fairway. A bright, powerful flashlight beam swept across the pond. The white light passed just inches over the suspect's head. He squeezed his eyes shut and held his breath. He stood frozen in the muddy water. For 5 agonizing minutes, he did not move a single muscle. Finally, the officers turned off their flashlights. They slowly walked back toward their patrol cars. They assumed the suspect had jumped the outer fence. The man opened his eyes. The area was completely silent again. He smiled quietly to himself. He had won the game. He had successfully outsmarted the local police department. But his victory was a tragic illusion. He was entirely unaware of the apex predator sharing his hiding spot. A Florida golf course pond is a highly active ecosystem. It is a hunting ground. Less than 50 feet away from the suspect, a massive American alligator was resting. It was nearly 10 feet long and weighed hundreds of pounds. The dark, muddy water made visibility completely zero. But the alligator did not need vision. Nature had equipped it with a flawless tracking system. Alligators possess tiny black dots around their upper and lower jaws. These are called integumentary sensory organs. They are highly specialized biological motion detectors. Whenever a fish or an animal moves underwater, it creates tiny pressure waves. These invisible ripples travel through the water. The alligator's sensory pits detect those tiny changes in pressure with absolute terrifying precision. They can pinpoint the exact location and size of a target in total darkness. The suspect felt safe, but his body was betraying him. Every time he shifted his weight in the sticky mud, he created a water wave. Every time his heart beat rapidly against his chest, it sent a pulse into the pond. He was unknowingly broadcasting his exact coordinates to a prehistoric predator. The massive reptile sank completely beneath the surface. It did not make a single sound. It moved toward the suspect with silent, lethal efficiency. The dark water swallowed its approach entirely. The suspect let out a long sigh of relief. He decided the coast was clear. He took a heavy step forward to climb out of the water. That sudden movement was the final trigger. The ambush happened entirely below the waterline. The biological collision was sudden and totally one-sided. The massive jaws clamped down on the suspect with a crushing force. The bite pressure exceeded 2,000 pounds per square inch. The human skeleton is completely unequipped to survive this extreme mechanical force. The initial strike caused catastrophic blunt force trauma. It severely compromised the structural integrity of his lower body. Before he could even scream, the predator initiated a rapid roll maneuver. This violent rotational force instantly dragged the victim deep underwater. The sudden shock and raw panic severely depleted his remaining oxygen. The massive physical trauma was immediately compounded by murky fluid rapidly entering his airway. The rapid submersion caused severe and irreversible asphyxiation. The human brain was completely deprived of oxygen. Total loss of consciousness followed within seconds. Cardiac arrest occurred shortly after, dictated strictly by the cold mathematics of nature. The ecosystem simply absorbed the human intrusion. By sunrise, the golf course was completely peaceful again. Dew sparkled on the neatly trimmed grass. The pond water was flat and still. A single muddy sneaker floated gently against the reeds. Just a few feet away, the aluminum warning sign stood bathed in the early morning light. It silently stated an ancient rule that could never be outrun. May 2007. The standard safety protocol for loading a heavy watercraft requires deep water and absolute patience. A local man sitting at the base of a cracked concrete boat ramp in coastal Florida decided to completely skip this step. The blinding midday sun baked his heavy personal watercraft at the base of the concrete slip. His large pickup truck was parked on the steep incline just ahead of him. Attached to the truck was an old rusted steel boat trailer. The trailer featured two long wooden bunks wrapped in heavy marine carpet. The truck was parked too far up the ramp. Because of this, the carpeted trailer bunks were completely dry and exposed to the hot sun. The man was severely sunburned, dehydrated, and entirely out of patience. He just wanted to go home. The standard safety protocol for loading a heavy watercraft requires time. You are supposed to back the trailer deeply into the water. Then, you gently float the jet ski directly over the submerged bunks. Finally, you attach a thick nylon strap and manually turn a heavy metal hand winch. You crank the winch until the machine slowly locks into place. It is a slow, physically demanding process. The tired driver decided to completely skip the manual labor. He formulated a terrible shortcut in his mind. He looked at the gap between his floating jet ski and the dry trailer. He planned to use raw engine power to aggressively drive the 800-pound machine straight up the dry concrete. He thought he could simply jump the physical gap and slide right into place. To understand his fatal mistake, you must understand how a jet drive actually works. A personal watercraft does not use a sharp metal propeller spinning under the boat. Instead, it uses an internal water pump. A metal impeller spins furiously inside a tight metal tube. The machine sucks heavy water in through a grate on the bottom. It then forces that water out the back like a high-pressure fire hose. This specific mechanical system requires a massive, constant flow of dense water to create forward thrust. If the jet pump sucks in plain air, the forward thrust drops to absolute zero. The driver lined up the nose of his machine with the back of the empty trailer. The jet ski was resting on a shallow, slippery patch of wet algae. The carpeted bunks of the trailer sat roughly 3 feet away, baking in the dry heat. He gripped the rubber handlebars tightly. He squeezed the throttle trigger all the way to the plastic grip. The powerful engine screamed with sudden, deafening revolutions. For a long, dangerous second, the machine did absolutely nothing. The spinning turbine sucked in a massive gulp of air and churning white foam. The heavy machine vibrated violently, but it refused to move forward. The pump simply could not grab enough water to push the weight. The driver had a final, fleeting chance to let go of the throttle. He had a chance to realize his physics experiment was failing. Instead, his frustration took over. He stubbornly kept the throttle pinned wide open. He aggressively waited for the machine to suddenly find grip. It was a critical, irreversible miscalculation of momentum. The rapidly spinning impeller suddenly dropped down and caught a deep, solid surge of dense water. The enclosed jet pump instantly converted the extreme engine speed into massive forward thrust. The heavy machine launched out of the shallow water with massive kinetic force. It launched completely over the concrete gap. It slammed heavily down onto the dry, carpeted bunks of the trailer. This is where basic physics took absolute control. Extreme friction immediately engaged. The dry marine carpet gripped the smooth fiberglass hull like coarse sandpaper. The heavy watercraft stopped its violent forward motion almost instantly. The driver, however, did not stop. The laws of motion dictate that an object in motion stays in motion until an external force stops it. The machine was halted by the trailer, but the man's heavy body kept moving forward at terrifying speed. The sudden deceleration violently catapulted him straight over the handlebars. The fast geometry of the accident left him absolutely no time to raise his hands in defense. He flew forward with the full kinetic energy of the launch. His rapid trajectory sent him flying headfirst directly into the heavy steel post of the manual winch assembly. The impact was totally devastating. The human skull cannot absorb a high-velocity collision with solid industrial steel. The sudden, violent strike caused catastrophic structural failure of the cranium. Massive, non-survivable blunt force trauma was inflicted instantly upon impact. The severe neurological damage permanently compromised all vital functions within milliseconds. Total neurological failure and subsequent cardiac arrest were immediate and entirely irreversible. The mechanical shortcut had ended in a brutal, uncompromising demonstration of energy transfer. The loud, metallic echo of the violent crash faded slowly across the empty parking lot. The heavy watercraft rested perfectly centered on the trailer bunks, exactly where the driver wanted it. The two-stroke engine continued to idle smoothly in the summer heat. A thin stream of hot, cooling water trickled steadily from the rear exhaust port. It splashed softly onto the hot concrete. The heavy nylon winch strap remained neatly coiled. It silently waited for a manual task that would never happen. March 2007. A highly confident local homeowner stood high up in the dense canopy of a massive oak tree, determined to avoid paying professional tree service fees. A sunny spring morning had settled over the quiet Central Florida neighborhood. The smell of freshly cut grass filled the humid air, but the calm was suddenly shattered by his gas-powered chainsaw. He wanted to remove a large, dead wooden branch hanging dangerously over his tiled roof. He wore no safety harness, no protective rigging, and absolutely no hard hat. He was armed only with a heavy vibrating saw and a deeply flawed sense of spatial geometry. Safe tree cutting is an unforgiving science of weight distribution. Professional arborists use heavy ropes to control the immense weight of falling timber. The golden rule of safely cutting a large branch is incredibly simple and completely absolute. You must always position your body securely on the main trunk of the tree. When the wood fibers finally snap, gravity instantly takes total control. Anything not physically connected to the main tree will immediately drop to the ground. The homeowner entirely ignored this fundamental law of physics. He found it very difficult to reach the exact spot he wanted to cut. He did not want to stretch awkwardly from the main trunk. To get a much more comfortable angle, he made a catastrophic tactical decision. He climbed directly out onto the dead branch itself. He straddled the rough, dry bark like a cowboy riding a wild horse. He was now sitting exactly on the massive payload he was actively trying to cut loose. He was suspended over 30 feet in the air. Directly beneath him was a solid, poured concrete patio. He tightly gripped the vibrating plastic handle of the running chainsaw. He pressed the rapidly spinning metal chain firmly into the thick wood. He placed the blade directly between his body and the main trunk of the oak. Wood chips flew wildly into the humid morning air. The sharp metal teeth chewed rapidly through the dense timber. The loud engine noise completely masked the dangerous sounds of the wood grain groaning under his body weight. For several minutes, he felt completely secure. The thick branch remained perfectly rigid as the deep groove grew steadily wider. This created a highly dangerous, temporary illusion of absolute stability. The homeowner smiled to himself. He was fully convinced his do-it-yourself shortcut was a massive success. He pressed the chainsaw throttle trigger even harder. The spinning steel chain finally sliced through the very last layer of wood, connecting the branch to the tree. His false sense of security vanished in a single fraction of a second. A sharp, violent snap of breaking wood echoed through the quiet yard. The sudden, terrifying sensation of zero gravity instantly took over his body. The heavy branch smoothly detached from the trunk. Because the man was sitting directly on the severed portion, he instantly became a permanent part of the falling mass. He dropped from the high canopy exactly like a heavy stone. A 30-foot freefall lasts just over 1.5 seconds. It provides exactly enough time for the human brain to realize a fatal mistake. It provides absolutely no time to physically correct it. The man and the heavy timber plummeted downward together in a terrifying blur. They collided violently with the hard, unyielding surface of the concrete patio below. The human skeleton is entirely unequipped to safely absorb a high-velocity impact against solid stone. The sudden, violent deceleration caused massive and immediate blunt force trauma to his entire body. The extreme transfer of raw kinetic energy resulted in catastrophic structural compromise of the cranium and the spinal column. The severe mechanical impact permanently destroyed vital neurological pathways in a matter of milliseconds. Total loss of consciousness was completely instantaneous. Complete cardiac arrest followed immediately. The outcome was dictated purely by the uncompromising, invisible laws of gravity. The loud, heavy crash brought total silence back to the suburban yard. The massive wooden branch rested quietly on the cracked concrete tiles. The gas-powered chainsaw had tumbled safely onto the soft green lawn nearby. Its hot motor continued to idle loudly in the bright morning sun. It remained completely unaffected by the tragic failure of basic human logic. October 2009. A heavy-duty commercial concrete pump truck is a massive machine that forces liquid stone through a narrow rubber tube using immense hydraulic pressure. On a dusty residential construction site in Central Florida, the harsh midday sun beat down relentlessly on this loud machinery. The heavy air smelled of dry dirt and diesel exhaust as a local worker stood nervously near a deep trench. A local construction worker stood nervously near the heavy machinery. He was completely soaked in sweat, deeply frustrated, and racing against a ticking clock. Wet concrete waits for absolutely no one. Once the thick mixture leaves the spinning mixer, it immediately begins to harden into solid rock. The worker was frantically trying to pour a solid foundation. Suddenly, the heavy equipment stopped working. A massive, thick rubber delivery hose lay entirely motionless in the dry dirt. It was completely clogged with rapidly drying cement. The legally mandated safety protocol for clearing a high-pressure line requires extreme patience. The operator must immediately shut down the massive diesel pumping engine. Then they must slowly open a mechanical valve to safely release the trapped internal pressure. Only then can the heavy hose be safely opened and manually cleaned. The exhausted worker decided to completely ignore the heavy equipment safety manual. He chose to rely entirely on brute physical force instead of cautious common sense. To truly understand his fatal error, you must understand the invisible physics of industrial hydraulics. A commercial concrete pump forces thousands of pounds of liquid stone through a narrow rubber tube. It uses immense mechanical hydraulic pressure to do this. When drying concrete accidentally forms a solid rock blockage inside the hose, the machine does not automatically stop. The massive diesel engine stubbornly continues to push. It rapidly builds up a terrifying amount of compressed energy right behind the solid plug. The internal pressure trapped inside the line can easily exceed 100 atmospheres. The heavy black rubber hose was visibly bulging. It was stretched to its absolute physical limits. It was essentially a highly unstable pressure vessel resting quietly in the dirt. The impatient worker aggressively grabbed a heavy, long-handled steel sledgehammer. He walked directly up to the tightly stretched, bulging section of the heavy black hose. He did not bother to turn off the incredibly loud pumping engine. He raised the massive steel hammer high above his tired shoulders. He actively planned to violently smash the solid concrete plug from the outside. He swung the heavy metal tool downward with all of his remaining physical strength. The heavy steel hammerhead aggressively struck the highly tense rubber surface. That single violent kinetic shock was the ultimate, irreversible trigger. The sudden physical impact instantly shattered the solid concrete blockage trapped deep inside the thick tube. The structural rock plug completely disappeared. The terrifying amount of trapped, highly compressed hydraulic energy was violently released in a tiny fraction of a millisecond. The massive release of internal pressure instantly caused the heavy rubber hose to violently recoil. The thick tube and its solid metal end nozzle snapped backward like an enormous, unpredictable bullwhip. The sudden movement was incredibly violent and completely invisible to the human eye. The heavy metal tip literally broke the sound barrier as it whipped through the dusty air. The worker was standing entirely too close to the hazardous pressure zone. The fast, erratic geometry of the whipping heavy hose left him absolutely no time to step away. The heavy metal nozzle struck the man directly in the head with catastrophic force. The human skull simply cannot withstand a supersonic collision with solid industrial steel. The extreme transfer of sudden kinetic energy caused massive, instantaneous blunt force trauma. The incredibly violent impact caused immediate, catastrophic structural failure of the cranium. The severe physical damage instantly and permanently compromised his central nervous system. Total, irreversible neurological failure occurred within a single, brief millisecond. Instantaneous loss of consciousness was immediately followed by absolute cardiac arrest. The brutal mechanical release of high pressure had ended in a totally uncompromising demonstration of stored energy. The loud rhythmic thrum of the massive diesel engine continued to steadily echo across the empty dirt lot. The heavy rubber hose dropped limply back onto the hot ground. It jerked softly as the powerful pump successfully pushed a fresh wave of wet concrete out of the metal nozzle. The thick sludge spilled slowly and aimlessly into the dry Florida mud. The heavy steel sledgehammer lay quietly in the dust nearby. Its totally fatal task was finally finished. October 2012. A large industrial tractor tire holds a truly massive volume of air at extremely high pressure, containing the exact same kinetic energy as a heavy structural collapse. Inside a cluttered open-air garage in rural Florida, the stifling afternoon heat hung heavily. A local man knelt on the stained concrete floor, completely ignoring this mechanical fact. He was attempting to mount and inflate a massive, heavily weathered tractor tire entirely by himself. Professional tire shops always inflate these massive wheels inside a heavy steel safety cage. This thick metal cage is designed to physically catch heavy steel parts if the wheel assembly violently fails under pressure. The man in the garage did not own a safety cage. He simply laid the massive wheel flat on the concrete floor and knelt directly over it. He also entirely ignored a much more lethal variable. The heavy steel rim holding the rubber tire together was severely compromised. Deep, flaky rust had heavily corroded the metal locking ring. This split ring is a thick metal band that snaps into place to keep the entire assembly securely clamped together. It was the only physical barrier preventing the compressed air from violently escaping. He attached a high-capacity commercial air compressor to the brass valve stem. He turned the loud machine on and watched the thick rubber slowly expand. The loud, rhythmic thud of the air compressor completely masked the highly dangerous sounds of the rusted metal groaning under extreme stress. The internal pressure steadily climbed past 50, then 80, then 100 pounds per square inch. The rusted metal locking ring was being stretched to its absolute breaking point. The massive amount of kinetic energy was desperately searching for a structural weakness. The man felt completely confident in his progress. He leaned his head directly over the center of the heavy rim to closely inspect the seating of the rubber bead. That simple minor shift in posture sealed his fate. A tiny high-pitched metallic ping briefly echoed over the compressor noise. It was the final sound of the rusted metal fibers totally failing. In a tiny fraction of a second, the heavy steel locking ring catastrophically ruptured. The terrifying amount of highly compressed air trapped inside the massive tire was released instantly. The sudden massive pressure drop launched the solid steel ring straight upward. It flew toward the ceiling with the exact kinetic energy of a high-velocity projectile. The man was positioned squarely in the center of the hazardous impact zone. The fast geometry of the sudden rupture left his brain absolutely no time to process the threat or move away. The heavy, flying steel ring struck him directly in the head at massive speed. The human cranium is entirely unequipped to survive a high-velocity collision with solid flying metal. The sudden, incredibly violent impact caused immediate and catastrophic structural failure of the skull and upper spinal column. Massive, non-survivable blunt force trauma instantly destroyed all vital neurological pathways. Total, irreversible loss of consciousness occurred in a matter of milliseconds. Complete cardiac arrest immediately followed. The outcome was dictated strictly by the brutal laws of rapid energy transfer. The deafening bang of the tire blowout echoed loudly across the quiet rural fields. It violently rattled the tin roof of the old garage. The heavy steel locking ring embedded itself deeply into the wooden rafters high above. The massive commercial air compressor continued to run loudly on the stained concrete floor. It mindlessly pumped a steady stream of invisible air into the completely empty garage. It silently did its job long after the human element had been permanently removed. 11. Safe marine navigation relies entirely on strict weight distribution and appropriate mechanical thrust. A local fisherman preparing to leave a muddy riverbank in a quiet Florida bayou was about to violently violate both of these rules. A cold, thick morning fog drifted slowly across the dark water as he sat in his cheap, flat-bottomed John boat. It was a vessel designed exclusively for slow, calm movement in a very shallow water. The man was determined to reach his favorite fishing spot before the sun came up. To achieve this, he had severely altered the delicate mechanical balance of his tiny boat. He had recently visited a local marine junkyard and salvaged a massive, high-horsepower outboard motor. He crudely bolted this heavy, incredibly powerful commercial engine directly to the flimsy aluminum back of his lightweight craft. A flat-bottomed John boat weighing less than 200 pounds requires a very small, low-power motor. If you apply too much rotational power to a vessel with practically zero weight in the front, the basic laws of physics violently take over. The fisherman sat alone in the very back of the boat. He rested his right hand firmly on the heavy throttle tiller. His own body weight combined with the massive engine pushed the rear of the boat deep into the dark water. The front aluminum nose of the boat was lifted dangerously high. It pointed slightly up toward the foggy sky like a ramp. The man aggressively pulled the starter cord. The massive outboard motor roared to life. It shook the thin aluminum hull violently with raw power. He did not gently ease the boat away from the muddy bank. He was deeply impatient to gain maximum speed right away. He aggressively twisted the heavy throttle grip completely wide open. It was a massive, irreversible miscalculation of mechanical torque. The large metal propeller violently bit into the dense water. It instantly generated a colossal amount of rotational force. Because the front of the tiny boat weighed almost nothing, the vessel simply could not push forward through the heavy water. Instead, the extreme forward thrust of the propeller acted as a massive pivot point. It forced the heavy back of the boat straight down into the river mud. At the exact same time, it violently pushed the incredibly light front end straight up into the air. The boat defied horizontal movement and chose vertical rotation instead. In a single terrifying second, the entire boat executed a complete, high-speed backflip. The man had absolutely no time to let go of the throttle. He had absolutely no time to jump safely into the water. The sudden vertical rotation violently threw him backward onto the shallow, muddy bank. A fraction of a second later, the heavy aluminum hull and the massive outboard motor crashed directly upside down on top of him. The spinning metal propeller was still turning at maximum revolutions per minute. The human body is entirely defenseless against a heavy crushing weight combined with active mechanical rotation. The sudden impact of the falling engine block caused catastrophic blunt force trauma. This was immediately compounded by severe fatal mechanical trauma from the active equipment impacting his upper body. The extreme structural compromise permanently destroyed his vital organs in a matter of milliseconds. Total, irreversible loss of consciousness was absolutely instantaneous. Immediate cardiac arrest was strictly guaranteed by the catastrophic physical damage. The brutal mechanical transfer of rotational energy into a vertical flip ended in total tragedy. The loud, aggressive roar of the heavy outboard motor suddenly choked and died. The hot engine block was fully submerged in the wet mud. The thin aluminum boat rested completely upside down in the swamp grass. A single empty plastic fishing cooler bobbed gently away into the thick morning fog. The quiet bayou returned to total, indifferent silence. It quietly absorbed the fatal consequences of human impatience and completely ignored physics. 6 preventable finales. When someone ignores every warning sign and meets a tragic end, society often laughs. But let's be brutal in the comments. Does society owe sympathy to someone who actively engineers their own destruction? Or is Darwinism simply doing its job? Drop your harshest verdict below. If you respect the cold truth of consequence, hit like and subscribe right now.